I'll try, but let me not make a promise, okay? I don't wanna overpromise and underdeliver.
Could you at least like say which chapters to read
Yeah, from this point on, pretty much chapters are in sequence.
of twos?
The chapter 4, I think it starts matrix algebra.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that point on, you're just gonna follow the textbook.
So next class you would say read chapters six and seven.
Chapter 4,
Chapter 4 and
4
5.
and 5, yeah.
Okay.
It's gonna be in that sequence, yes. So this is the agenda for today. I'll start with stocks and flows because although I suppose that most of you or all of you are already familiar with this distinction, it is really important, and I noticed that some students don't have that in their background. So let me close this door so that the microphone can capture the voice. All measurements, the basic ones, the fundamental measurements of everything in the physical sciences, in engineering, in industry, and of course in the social sciences as well. The measurement of things, or the measurement of events, human interactions, etc., are basically of two kinds. The basic ones, right? They can either be measures of something at a particular point in time, at a given point in time. So if this is the timeline. This is the timeline, this is time. Right, the measurement is going to be either at a given point in time, or it's going to be over a given period of time. So we have, like for example, in economics or in accounting, finance, or let me start with something physical, something simple. Let's suppose that we have here a container with some liquid like water. And let's say that there is a way for water to get into the container. So that's a pipe, right, that is streaming water into this container. And then let's say that we also have a way for the water to flow out of the container. Okay? So if we are going to take basic measurements of this system, it's a hydrodynamic system, if we view it over a period of time, then we can take a snapshot and measure the amount of water contained in this liquid at a particular point in time, like right now. Right? So let's say that it's 10 gallons. And over a period of time, water is going to flow in. Right? If we if we turn this off, right? So there's no way for water to leak out, and let's rule out evaporation and any other way for water to disappear. Then the water that flows in over a period of time is going to accumulate, it's going to gather. Okay? Alternatively, like we can close this off, shut it off, and then turn this open. So the water is gonna leak out over a given period of time. Right? A given period of time. So you will have to subtract it. So let's say that over a period of time, let's say this is now, and this is tomorrow at the same time. Let's say that there were 50 gallons of water that got in, and 40 gallons of water that got out. Then you have to add 50 waters and subtract 40. So that means that over this day, right, over this 24-hour period, the water would accumulate, and you would have, instead of 10, at the end of the period, you would have 20, right? That's pretty basic, pretty basic. So when we talk, these are conventional definitions in economics and in finance. When we talk about the term wealth, what do we mean by that? Do we mean a stock or do we mean a flow? Conventional stock, right? So we talk about the wealth of an individual, basically the balance sheet of an individual. So what we have here is a visual diagram that illustrates the fundamental principles of accounting. So wealth is a stock because it's a measure at a point in time. What is the wealth of an individual? The wealth, the equity of an individual, or the net worth of an individual, or an organization like a corporation, business, right, or a university, a non-profit organization. Could be a public agency, it could be a state, etc. So any entity, when we refer to wealth or equity or net worth, those are terms that accountants use, we are referring to stock measures. Debt, right, that's on the liability side. So let's go quickly over the two fundamental financial statements that are produced by accountants. There are two. The first one, let's start with that one, the balance sheet. So the balance sheet is a financial statement that describes the financial condition of an organization or an individual. It could be an individual at a particular point in time. Let's be careful with that.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you.
So, like for example, December 31st, 2018. And it has two sides. This is called the asset side, and this is called the liability side. So assets and liabilities. And what we have here is a list with the corresponding values, right, at that particular point in time of the resources that are under the management, under the purview of the organization. So the organization's name is here, like for example, XYZ Incorporated. And so we have assets such as the balance in the deposit balance in checking accounts, savings accounts, etc. So deposits, cash. And then here's the amount of cash. And then there are things such as inventories. And here's the value of those inventories. And this is typically recorded at book value, although that depends on the conventions of the organization. And different companies have different methods, and different countries have different principles of accounting, etc. But this is just the general sense of the balance sheet. Inventories. So if you have a company, let's say like a factory that manufactures shoes, so you can think of this factory as having three types of storage facilities or warehouses. Although it could be the same one, just having three types of items in them, stored in them, right? Here you would have the supplies, the raw materials, etc., that are used, that are combined here as inputs in the production and making of shoes, like leather, like rubber, etc., whatever is used in the making of shoes. And then a period of time ends, like for example, the shift ends, the workers go home, etc., and then they would have semi-finished or in process goods, so they would be like stored here. And then once the product is finished and is ready to be shipped out to the wholesaler, then you would have them here as finished products. Well, the value at a given point in time, at that point in time, the value of these inventories added together goes right there. Right? And you may have like machinery and equipment, You may have vehicles like trucks and cars and stuff like that. You may have buildings and structures. And you may have also bonds of different kinds, securities of different kinds, which are obligations or liabilities of other organizations. Right? They are liabilities of other organizations. In fact, cash is a liability of, well, the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve ultimately belongs to the federal government. That's not formally so, but if there are profits, the profits go to the Treasury. Right? Originally, it was funded as a sort of cooperative of private banks, but nowadays, it was created by an act of Congress in 1913. So the Federal Reserve is basically a federal agency, government agency, although it's supposed to be autonomous and all that. And so the currency that we use, US dollars, are a liability of the Federal Reserve, which is to say is a liability of the federal government, which is to say is a liability of all of us, right, politically constituted as a nation. And so we may have like insurance policies here and other liabilities or obligations incurred by other organizations. Okay, so these are the resources under the management of XYZ Incorporated. What is the source, right, of, like, here's the total value, right? So the total value of these assets, we add it up, and it's the summation of all of these numbers here. And so where does this value come from? Right? This is where the value under the management of this organization is structured or allocated, how it is allocated among these different types of assets. But where does it come from? Well, it can only come from the individual owners of XYZ Incorporated, the stockholders or shareholders of XYZ Incorporated, or it may come from other people, from other entities like banks, right? If XYZ Incorporated has incurring debt with private banks or international banks, or or maybe with the suppliers, those suppliers that provide this organization with the inputs that it uses, that it combines in the making of shoes, or maybe it purchased the machinery and the equipment on it's paying in installments. It purchased it on credit. It's paying it, so part of the value of that machinery is a liability. Typically, the way the liabilities are listed, you start with the short-run ones first, kind of like the balance of your credit card, right? So the short-term liabilities here, short-term debt, and then the longer-term one, longer-term debt follows, like mortgages and other type of credit lines that are longer term. And finally, the residual value of these assets is going to be liability of this organization with the individual stockholders or shareholders of XYZ Inc. Right? So this is going to be the equity, right? By individual, by the way, I do not mean necessarily individual humans. It could be other type of fiduciary structures, like other corporations or holdings. Like General Electric, for example, is a conglomerate that last time I checked, but probably that's obsolete by now. NBC, the TV network, used to belong to General Electric. Just watch the thing behind you.
Oh, you need it. So.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, I just try not to bump into it because then.
Okay, sorry.
So I was saying that the equity may actually be held not necessarily by individual persons, but it may be held by other organizations or fiduciary structures, like other corporations or other entities like holdings or insurance companies may own stock, right, etc. So this is all also, of course, in monetary terms, and then you can add it up, and this is the liabilities, the total liabilities. Accountants sometimes refer to these liabilities as liabilities proper, but this is also a liability because actually the point of a corporation is the separation, the legal separation between the individual owners, legal owners of the corporation and the corporation itself. So it's important to view equity as another form of liability. So you won't be surprised to know that each of these items, and of course the totals as well, right, are stocks. They are stocks because they are point-in-time measures. Stock is one of those words that has many meanings. This is the particular meaning that when we refer to measurements, right? When we refer to finance, stock means just this part here. Yes, you were going to say something? Okay, that's fine. Okay, so all of these elements here, all of these items here is a container with water, right? It's a container with water. You can think of it that way. And this is, of course, a big container with water because it's the sum of all of those water contained in all of those bases, and so on and so forth, right? So this as well, but this is negative by convention. And they are also waters in containers. Okay, that is one of the documents. The second most fundamental financial statement produced by accountants is loss statement, income statement. You're probably familiar with all this, but I'm just going over it because I don't want to assume that you know this. And so let's say that it's also about XYZ Incorporated. And this, of course, is from say, January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2018. And this is going to be a description of the financial condition of this entity, this organization, but over a period of time, right? Basically financial activity, right? The processes that take place in that organization from the point of view of the value, right? The circulation of value. So what we have on the top line is the revenues that's added, that's positive. The revenues from the sales of, let's say, shoes and whatever else this factory may produce, belts, etc. So the revenues would go here, and then you subtract the cost of goods sold. The cost of goods sold. I'm using the terminology, the most conventional one used by accountants. That's to be subtracted. And that gives us the some sort of gross profit. Or gross income, like accountants use different, and people get very creative. Corporations in the United States are supposed to provide the SEC, the public ones, right, with quarterly financial statements and an annual, more complete report to the stockholders, and they have to contain, at the very minimum, these financial statements with all sorts of clarifications and footnotes to explain the detailed financial information. Right, so it's gross profit, and then if you subtract here operating the cost of goods sold is like the cost of making the shoes, right? So it involves, of course, labor costs, the cost of the raw materials, the cost of the different inputs, and then here operating expenses, and typically here they include also depreciation plus depreciation. The depreciation of the fixed assets, the durable assets, the assets that last, that are used up in production, and not only in production, and different activities here in this business over several periods, over several years. Right? That's those things such as machines, trucks, right? Trucks are not fully consumed productively in a given year, but they are used up over 10 years until they become junk and then they would discard them. And so you have to depreciate them, and there are different rules of depreciation, etc. So the depreciation is a flow, right? The value of the truck. Let's say that the value of the truck is, I have no idea how much a truck is worth. Let's say that a truck is worth $50,000, right? So let's say that on average the truck lasts 10 years. So you can depreciate $5,000 each year. So there's a linear rule of depreciation, so that in 10 years the value of the truck is zero, right? It becomes junk, and actually in reality the value becomes negative because you have to pay a company to haul it and throw it away, right, or recycle it. Yes.
You said you specialize in financial economics, right?
Yeah, that's what.
So from your experience, what would you say are the most important variables from these aspects of a stock's demand? Like, because I heard talks that people focus on revenue, gross profit, which, in your opinion, has the most variable effect on demand?
On demand
of a stock in a separate case.
That depends. The devil lives in the details. I cannot give you like a general answer to that.
I don't think there is a general answer.
There is not a general answer, and moreover, like just to be fully honest with you, I do not believe in finance. I don't think it is. Because valuation of assets depends. Valuation of assets is forward-looking because the value of an asset, and by the way, that also is the Marxist view. Marxist view is like what the value of an asset, like the labor value of an asset, is the quantity of social labor that is required to reproduce, to replicate, like for example, this table. Do we know for sure how much labor is it going to take to replicate this table right now? No, we can only estimate that. We can only guesstimate it on the basis of historical, like how long has it taken so far to make a table of this kind, and to make, of course, each of the elements that go into this table, etc. Like we can estimate that if we have enough information, but can we anticipate exactly how much it's going to take us to replace this table? We really don't know. And go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, at least in general, in conventional finance terms, like the most common, the one that you see in the financial press, measure is price over earnings. So it would be, I mean, there's price over earnings ratio. There's all that about Marxist, but what people in finance start looking at, there's much more that goes into it. But like the starting point for looking at an equity is just a PE ratio. That's how they compare different companies across.
Yeah, but
the price of the stock over the earnings, either looking back or expected earnings for the next year. Yeah.
The fundamental reason why I think ultimately, finance doesn't work, at least the branch of finance, which is the fundamental branch of finance, which is the asset valuation, right? The valuation of assets, is that the future is unknown. It's fundamentally unknown. We are not talking about the future of where the planet X in solar system Y is going to be 10 years from now. Actually, that we may anticipate with a lot of precision. We can be very accurate about where a asteroid is going to be, a comet is going to be in 100 years. We can be very accurate because those things are very regular. The problem is when we're talking about anticipating social outcomes that depend on social interaction. In particular, when we have conflicts of interest in society. Basically, I benefit from your ignorance. Why? It's like we are playing poker here. I don't want to show you my hand because then you will take advantage of it. You will stab me, right? And I don't want to disclose my hand. So I'm actually going to try to confuse you. I'm going to try to pretend that I have a hand that I don't have. I'm going to bluff and all that. And so that's finance for you. So, because a lot of, for example, derivative trading on value, I'm not talking in terms of utility, I'm talking in terms of value, is a zero-sum game. What you gain is what I lose and vice versa. So that, setup is perfect for me confusing you, right? Mystifying you, like, trying to confuse you so that I can take advantage of you, right? So if you want to understand this idea more, more in depth, I recommend chapter 12 of the General Theory, John Maynard Keynes. It's about the formation of long-term expectations. I recommend it. So
Chapter 12.
if you read it, if you're curious,
Employment theory?
yeah, General Theory.
This book?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's General Theory, chapter 12. If you're interested in finance, that will dispel any faith that you may have in those methods. Okay, so operating expenses plus depreciation are subtracted. And this by the way, conventionally, this is at book value, right? It's at book value. And so that means that it's historical information. The point of that historical information, this is not perfect. It's just like a guide that you use in order to take action looking forward, right? And action is always about what you expect to happen in the future. It's like how you adjust your behavior to what you expect to happen in the future in the face of the information that you have about the past. So if you subtract the operating expenses from the gross profit, then you get something called operating profit, or also called operating profit, or accountants call it EBIT, horrible term, earnings before interest and taxes, EBIT. So that's that. And then if you subtract financial expenses and costs, or interest, but not only interest, but let's say financial expenses altogether, because it includes fees, and if you are late, the bank will hit you with something that is not formally interest, but it's sort of. So you subtract this, and you will get taxable profits, or some term like that. And finally, of course, you subtract all kinds of taxes, and the result will be net profit, or net income, or net earnings, etc. And this is the bottom line, right? So in this framework, right, these are the revenues. This is your equity, right? This is your equity, this thing here, this container. And then these are your revenues, these are all your expenses. And then, the residual value is going to accumulate there, and that's going to be that profit there. That net profit is going to add here, if it is positive, like let's say that is positive. So that means that 1 year later, this equity here is going to be that number plus that number. Okay? Number plus, yes.
If you were looking at like a financial statement, and it was negative equity, I guess I can't really wrap my head around what that exactly sort of means.
You are underwater, yeah. It means that you shouldn't worry. It's your creditors who shouldn't worry.
Okay.
They are in trouble, right? I mean, they make you feel like you are in trouble, but they are in trouble. It's like, when the value of your assets doesn't even pay for your debt, right? And they are not gonna let you go legally, right? But basically, from a political viewpoint, you have the upper hand.
Yeah.
You're bankrupt.
But basically, you're insolvent.
Yeah, you're insolvent. You are
Right.
underwater.
Well, there's lots of newer IPOs right now that are running at negative equity, right? Take Uber.
If you, for example,
right?
Oh, Uber makes no money.
Mhm.
They're just running on new investors
Mhm.
until hopefully they can corner the market, have a monopoly,
Mhm.
and then start raising prices. So that's their whole strategy.
if you are Donald Trump, you can handle it, right? And he had to handle that situation several times in his life, apparently, right? So it's a political, it's a balance of forces kind of situation, right? Because, what is an obligation anyway? I mean, we make the state intervene, right? It's not only a moral obligation, it's a moral obligation, right? So there is no teeth. Well, there is like public shaming and all that, but it's not the same as you go to prison, right? And so we involve the state to put teeth on those obligations, right?
So they have to get in line.
Yeah, but
there's a hierarchy of who gets paid first.
right, there you go, the seniority and how solid that is,
Yeah.
Like you can think of the promises made by political candidates during a campaign also as bonds. But these bonds are really like thin, like they don't have a lot of teeth, unless like you figure out a political mechanism to make them pay if they default on the promises. Right? So because like they're gonna change their mind once they are in office, right? And so, but it's a promise, right? It's a promise that they are making. It's like, I will deliver this. Legislation, policies like economic policies, they are also bonds, right? Because they have to be approved by Congress. Fiscal policy it's embedded in the budget annual act of Congress. So anyways, I wanted to go quickly over this so that we can freely talk about stocks and flows, and we know what we're talking about, right? You won't be surprised to know that each of these things is water flowing over a period of time, right? So think of something like this with water flowing either in or out. In if positive, out if negative, right? So this is water in flowing during this period, and this is water outflowing during this period. Water outflow, right? And this is kind of the net. The inflow water minus the outflow water gives you the net flow. Yes.
For clarification,
Yes.
what does the water really represent? Is it stock
Well,
value or just stock?
Yeah, in this case, it represents value, right? It represents value. What do we mean by value? What do we mean by the value of this building? Like just in plain terms, I don't want anything technically sophisticated or, yeah.
If you were to like liquidate, like right now, you would get this amount of cash, this amount of money.
Well, we measure it in cash, we measure it in dollars, in our case, or in euros or yen, whatever, right? So, but what is it that we are measuring with dollars? What is it that we are measuring really?
Well,
How much other people want it, what you can get for it. Sort of
Yeah, I think you're pretty close to the, yeah.
The exchange value.
So it's, yeah, but what is, like, you are repeating like the word value, so like, but you said something interesting, I'll
the
invoke it.
definition of an asset is the value of an asset should be like the future economic benefit that you might get from it. So I think then
Okay.
what we're measuring is what's the future benefit that you can get from that thing.
Okay, so what we are saying, yeah, go ahead, please.
Profit. It's just how much you can get out of your assets that compensate for your liabilities and how much you can get left
I mean,
over.
look, this may not even belong to me, right? This may not even belong, it doesn't belong to me, right? It belongs to John Jay, which belongs to the city of New York, etc., whoever the principals of CUNY are, right? But I'm interested in knowing what is the value of this table. There's no profit involved for me as far as I am concerned. Now, yeah, please.
Like the cost of the raw materials and the labor.
Right, like the cost kind of gives us a hint of it, right?
And the labor added
Like
value.
what it costs to make the table, right? Why the cost of making the table like is kind of a measure of the. Let me get there. Actually, I'm going to jump to this point out here, but I want to get to that to the issue of value. But I just refer to what you said, right? So you said that the value of, for example, how do I determine the value of this building? Well, I try to look into the future. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty because I don't know what may happen. Right? Like people may migrate out of New York City because of the climate problems that we may have. The water level may go up, but we may not have the political resolve to, protect the city, the Manhattan, from water level rising or something, political crisis happen, right? So like people may say like, to hell with New York City, I don't believe in New York City anymore, I'm gonna move to Canada. People abandon the city, so like what is gonna be the value of this building, right? So the value of this building, it requires determining the value of, this is what the conventional notion of value says, right? It requires that we try to anticipate or figure out what are gonna be the future net benefits of holding this thing, right? Or being the legal owners of this building, right? What are the benefits that are going to accrue to us as a result of it? Benefits net of costs and expenses and all that, right? So all the pluses minus the minuses, right? And so basically, it's what is the value of this bunch of water right now? Well, is the water that is going to accumulate here in this container over time when I subtract the water that leaks out. So it seems like I'm really back to the same point. It's just that in one case, we are looking at value as a stock, and the other, when we're thinking of net benefits, we are thinking of the value as flows, right? So we just as flows, but then we want to translate them into this point in time, which is called discounting, right? In the jargon of finance, right? Determining the present value, discounted value of future flows, right? So I'm gonna translate these flows of dollars, I'm gonna measure them in dollars, right? And it's gonna be dollars, but these are gonna be dollars over time. And what I want is to know that right now, what is the total amount of dollars that represent the value of this building. So like it's dollars and dollars. So like I'm back to the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So here's what I'm gonna propose to you, but of course, I don't think I have a full answer to those profound philosophical questions, but I'm gonna give you one view that is of course informed by my intellectual upbringing. So I'm going to discuss now this item here, material and social reproduction. So here's the thing. Philosophers since ancient times, like Greek philosophers, for example, agonize over the distinction between the things in our society, like say in Athens, right? So Athens was the a city, concrete society, and what are the aspects of the life of our city that we cannot modify, we cannot alter because they belong to nature. They are part of our nature. Because they are part of our nature, right, we cannot really fundamentally remove them, right? Because they are gonna come back and bite us because they are natural, so to speak, right? So we just have to manage them. We have to figure out a way to manage those aspects of our life because they are nature. Like, for example, the fact that we are physical beings, that we are biological beings, that we need to ingest food, nourish our bodies, sleep, etc. Those things, as far as we know, right, as far as we've been able to figure out, we cannot get rid of them. We have to manage them, right, to the best of our ability, right? So they belong to the realm of nature. They are not modifiable. I want to distinguish those aspects of our life from those aspects of our life that we can modify, that we are capable of modifying. Like the sophist group of philosophers in ancient Greece, they distinguish between nature and convention, right? Convention is what we can alter, nature is what we cannot alter and can only manage, right? So the distinction that Marx made between material and social production, right? The production of what? Well, the production of ourselves, the production of our lives, right? It has to be a production of our material lives because we are material beings, right? So we exist in this material or physical world, and so we need to, in the first place, before we can sing, dance, or whatever, study economics, we have to be alive. So how do we reproduce over time? How do we replicate our lives recurrently? How do we do that? How do we manage that? And so the ultimate thing that we are reproducing is ourselves. And so here the question is ourselves, not in general, not just as material beings, but ourselves as humans here and now, right? Humans inserted in this society, in this social setting, etc. And so as humans, what is it really that separates us, and something that we were commenting on Thursday last week. As humans, what is it that differentiates us from the rest of the physical world, from the rest of nature? How are we different from other forms of reality around us? Yes.
Barter, truck, and exchange.
Yeah, there you go. That was Adam Smith, right? Adam Smith said that was kind of like a natural inclination of humans to barter, truck, and exchange, right? I will go back to that. I think that when you scratch on the surface of those terms, right, what you encounter is that humans help each other, right? It's just that when you say barter, what does it mean barter? It's like you give me this, I give you this, right? That's what it means to barter. But what I'm really doing, like if we break down this transaction, right, I'm really doing this for you, and then you are doing this for me. So I'm helping you, and you are helping me. I'm scratching your back, you are scratching my back, right? So it turns out that it's more complicated because, I'm not really the owner of this, and John Jay is the owner of this, but suppose that it's mine, right? And suppose that this is yours, right? And then we exchange it. What we are actually exchanging is the ownership over this, right? The ownership over this, which I'll talk about next, right? So, and you are handing me the ownership over this. So now I'm the one who is entitled to deciding what to do with this, and now you are entitled to deciding what to do with this. So we gain the power to decide what to do with each of our corresponding, the objects of property, right? Okay, but, so yeah, that is a quality of humans, right? It's a quality of humans that is really inherent to humans to a large extent, but there are other animal species that also cooperate, that also help one another. Right? Like wolves, they go in packs, they chase after their prey in packs, and etc. Fish also in banks, etc. So like there are other species, bees cooperate with other bees, like they form colonies, etc. So humans are not unique in that aspect, right? What has resulted, however, from our socialization or cooperation, from our helping one another, what has resulted is something that I think, I don't know how unique it is. That is a big argument, right? Like exactly where to draw the line. But it seems that we have developed something that we can call language, and something that we call rational thought. Rational thought is, of course, couched in language, has to have a linguistic form, and mathematics is a particular linguistic form in which we couch our language, express our language, present it, and therefore use it to communicate first with, I don't know if first, but with ourselves and then with others. And maybe we start by communicating with others first, and then that's how we learn to communicate with ourselves. Maybe babies learn first to interact with the mom, and then, because like the value, the sense of worth that we have individually, personally, depends on our upbringing, depends on people around us, how we basically reflect what others think of us. Like we try not to, and part of our maturity and becoming adult hinges on our ability to set the conditions of that and say I don't depend on what other people think of me. But the fact is that we do depend on what other people think of us. That's how we form our sense of who we are. Anyways, so I'll just tell you what the Marxist answer to this is, right? The Marxist answer to this is the following. Marx says, okay, if you take humans from a broad historical perspective, what is the characteristic of humans, right? Well, the characteristic of humans is that they engage with the world, right? They tackle the world, they go and grab the world and transform it, right? They produce, they produce themselves, right? And they don't do it in an instinctive way. They do it in a rational way. And basically what it means is like they do it with a sense of purpose. So they start with some sort of mental image of the product that they want, right? So they have a design, they have a plan, they have a goal or purpose, and they will the world in that direction. And of course, in that collision, the world may end up transformed differently than the human anticipated, or the humans anticipated, and also humans end up transformed. Right? So it's a complicated dynamic process going on there. But so humans start anticipating the outcome, and then you basically humans say, I want the world this way. This is the world that I need. This is the world that I want. Right? So they assert their needs, they assert their wants, and then this is the world as it exists. And there is a distance between the world as is and the world as we want it, and that's a human problem. The human problem is, how do I push the world in the direction toward the world that I want? How do I go from the world as it exists now to the world as it should be for me, right? The world as I need it. And so that process of transforming the world and making it fit our desires or aspirations is what we call production. That's how we produce. And so if this willful or purposeful form of engaging the world, this purposeful activity of humans, so this is a very general definition. So purposeful human activity. What is that? Well, just following the usage, the linguistic usage of the time, this is what everybody calls labor. So labor. So that is labor. Right? Labor is purposeful human activity, specifically human, right? Because maybe dogs and birds and bees, maybe they have some sort of purposeful activity, right? There are some biologists or zoologists who make that argument that actually dogs are very willful, and I would believe them. However, the character of this purposeful activity is really different, right? Humans have, as a result of their socialization, they have evolved this complex language that permits them to articulate rationally ideas in a very, very complex way. And that is kind of a different game. I think it's a different game. And so if purposeful activity is what characterizes humanity, then the production of ourselves is the production of ourselves as laborers. So we produce ourselves as laborers. So the whole point of what we do in the world, right? Everything kind of revolves around us. It's about producing and reproducing our humanity, but the essence of our humanity is our capacity or our powers to labor, to work, to transform the world willfully or purposefully. So we can call that labor power. It's the power to carry out labor, working activity. Well, so how do we produce our labor power? How do we produce, let's think of the most basic forms of labor, like manual labor or menial labor, like when we have to lift things, push them, and do things like that, mechanical tasks and things like that. Well, we need energy, we need to sleep, right? We need to sleep for a number of hours a day. We need to nourish our bodies, so we need to ingest food, right? And typically we call those activities, this is entirely conventional, it's difficult to decide exactly where to draw the line, but those activities we call consumption, personal consumption, right? I should say personal consumption, the immediate, the direct production of ourselves. When I eat an apple, right? I eat an apple. I'm nourishing my body, right? The apple is digested, and the digestive system then replaces the cells of my body that die, etc. So thank you very much for that apple, right? That allow me to do that. So breathing oxygen, the consumption of oxygen that I take directly from the atmosphere, right? That is personal consumption, because without breathing, I cannot have the combustion that basically powers my physical activity. And so I'm using by the way, I'm using the flow diagram type of objects that people in computer science use, right? A cylinder represents something like a repository of something, right? Something that is going to be held over time. And so we can measure it at a point in time. We can measure the content as a stock, right? So this is an activity. This takes time. It takes time. Yes.
Isn't contained within the notion of personal consumption a liability? Like,
for liability, to decide what is a liability or what is not a liability, I think we have to talk about ownership. And so what I want to do first is the material aspect.
Sure.
I want to describe the material aspect because that's going to be the bedrock. On top of it, we're going to build society. We're going to form social structures. And those social structures are going to lead us to, governments or states, capitalist companies, households, all of that, families, colleges, universities, blah, blah, right? So personal consumption is the activity that creates and recreates our labor power, right? At least in the most immediate sense, right? Now, of course, personal consumption requires, think like nowadays, for example, the act of eating, right? The act of eating, it's a whole ritual. I mean, we have cultural institutions that are just devoted to food, right? I mean, we have cable channels that are just like cooking channels, etc. So it's just, so definitely personal consumption is not a mindless activity. It's not like sleeping. Even sleeping is not a mindless activity. Because look at how much time and effort we put into deciding which pillow to use, whether we want the bed sheets to be like silk or cotton, and it's a lot of human purpose or human willfulness that goes into personal consumption. So it definitely uses up labor power. Okay, and in the case of just breathing air, although the atmosphere that we have now is a product, it's a historical product. Especially from the Industrial Revolution until now, we've been dumping a lot of garbage in the atmosphere, and we are now breathing. Last thing I learned is that we are inhaling large quantities of plastic. Forget about eating, inhaling through our noses, because micro particles that are floating in the air, in the atmosphere. So, but suppose that is pristine air around us, and then so that would be directly from nature, right? So we can call that like a natural resource, something like that, right? Like a natural resource. But what we consume, is it like raw nature? Not really, right? To produce ourselves, for our personal consumption, we use things like this. This is a consumable object, so we have to have some sort of, I'm going to put another cylinder here, we're going to have consumables or consumable wealth, right? And then that begs the question of where does that consumable wealth, but by this I mean not consumer like raw nature, but artificial, something that we produce. This is a product. So it's a product, so that means that it comes from a prior activity that then we can call just production. The whole thing is production because it's production of this, but I'm now using the term production in a more restricted sense, right? To just refer to the production of products, like products other than us. Okay. To produce, we are the producer, so we use up our labor power. We use natural resources. Definitely, we use natural resources. Natural resources, I mean something that is untouched by humans, although it's very hard to find that. What do we mean by natural resource? Like some galaxy out there? As soon as we start conceiving it, we are already putting labor into it. Right? You may say that this is fully artificial. No, it's not fully artificial. It's a chunk of nature transformed. You know, because there are minerals here from which we made metal. There's like, you know, trees that we cut and slice and then we turn into the wood, etc. So it's this, if we reduce it, if we remove all the layers of human activity that have been incorporated in making this table, if we like reverse engineer them, then what we end up with is just a bunch of natural resources, right? And then human activity. And that's what we end up with. However, right, there are certain products that are not ready for our immediate personal consumption. So there are products that don't go there, don't go there, and then there. Right? There are some products like, for example, wheat. Usually, we don't consume the wheat raw, right? The product of the farmer. The farmer produces the wheat, and then the wheat, let's say that it's stored here. There's another cylinder here. We're gonna call this means of production or productive wealth, something like that, right? So the wheat goes here, and then the wheat is gonna be processed here and turned into flour, and then the flour is gonna be deposited here, and this is gonna be like used up by the baker making bread, and then it's bread. So bread now we can consume. Right? And here I'm not really making the distinction between those means of production that we use up in a given year, like the flour in the bakery, right, or the sauce in the pizzeria, but also like machinery, like the oven in the bakery or in the pizzeria, right, that lasts for 10 years until it becomes junk, right? And it helps to produce a lot of pizzas, a lot of bread, etc. So that is a diagrammatic representation of material reproduction in the conception of, say, Marx. And except that Marx didn't use this type of diagrammatic elements that I took from flow diagrams from computer science. Okay, so now how do we go from here then to human individuals cooperating with each other and forming stable social structures, right? A system of social relations or social interactions that last. I think that the term structure is pretty good. And typically what we mean by structure is we mean something like this, right? So like let me illustrate it with an example. Suppose that we have just 3 objects like randomly located on let's say on this table. And they are solid, they can be wood, they can be plastic, but solid, or metal, something like that. And if they are just like randomly laid out like that, right, as a result of whatever process, maybe somebody pushed them and threw them there on the table, or maybe like spontaneously nature just like placed them there, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you just have these 3 elements there, they are just 3 pieces of whatever there, right? However, if you or nature, you know, through some process, right, it results that what you see is something like this. 2 of the objects are like this. This is the ground or the table top. And then on top of it, the other one, the third one. Then I think a modern human would probably recognize some structure there, something like a bridge. Something like a bridge. And a computer scientist gave me this idea. I'll tell you the name. He's now in disrepute because of the Jerry Epstein scandal. But his name, he passed away. But he had a terrific book on artificial. He's one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence. But apparently he was involved in pretty horrible crimes. His last name is Minsky. Minsky.
No relation with.
No, the Minsky, the economist.
I know, no relation with him.
No relation. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. But this is a different Minsky. This is I forgot his first name. I'm sorry, I'm so bad with names. But you will find that his book is called Society of Mind. Society of Mind. He said, if a scientist is trying to explain the phenomenon of life, right? So then the explanation cannot be, life comes from life. Of course, life comes from life. That is already going on, right? However, what we are asking is, originally, historically, in the history of nature, how did life happen in the first place? And so for life to emerge in the first place, you have to start with elements that in and by themselves are lifeless. So these elements, when you take life apart, and that happens when we die, by the way, basically we get all, fragmented and, decay and break down. And so, but if you take life apart, then what you find is elements that in and by themselves do not constitute anything living. They don't have the quality or the characteristics or the properties of what we call life, right? And you can discuss what those characteristics are. It has to be able to replicate itself, etc. Things like that. It interacts with the environment, takes and then throws something out into the environment. Yes.
But wouldn't that be subjective? Because you're saying it depends on our perception and how we, I guess, evaluate the things that we see, right? Or out of our curiosity, if we go back to time, with the element. But it would still be subjective. I don't know.
Well, do you mean that life is subjective? I think to some extent life, just most basic forms of life, have an element. They are somewhat subject because they are not just governed by, they don't decay, they don't follow the second law of thermodynamics, which would be increasing entropy. They actually go contrary, they swim against entropy. That's why they are life. And so it seems that they have a little bit of intent built into them, but that's not what you're asking.
No,
I'm sorry.
That's not what I was
Okay.
trying to say, but.
Or are you saying that that life is a matter of perception?
No, because you were saying, you were giving examples of structures, right? And then let's say 3 objects in there, and then you're saying that we build from that.
Oh,
So-
because I said that a modern human would recognize a bridge there, but it's
Right.
not necessarily a
Oh,
bridge.
okay, so-
It's just what it is, right?
Right.
But okay, yeah, the structure is an emergent phenomenon or an emergent property of these 3 elements. The 3 elements by themselves are just 3 pieces of whatever. But when they are combined, when they are placed with respect to each other in these positions, right? These 2 serving as the support or the columns of the bridge, and this as the platform of the bridge.
Mhm.
Then, for example, an ant, an insect that is walking here, instead of going around, it can go over this and get to the other side, right? So it's it functions as a bridge, right? It effectively functions as a bridge for this kind of thing, right? So this is different from that. Different from that. That's what I'm saying. Yes, what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, if you take as a given, right, that life could at some point be broken down into lifeless elements, right, and take elements to mean material, okay, and couldn't you conceptualize some kind of machine or device that could measure that, since like we can measure material the same way that you were saying before. You could look at a comet millions of miles away, and we do like make machines, whether that be a physical machine or math or mathematics, like a machine, like a process of like observing that material reality. If you could like break down life into that, like those components, there is a conceptual like device we can observe that through.
So are you saying that then we would be capable of creating life?
Well, I don't know if we
Assembly.
could create it, but we'd be able to like make that distinction. It's sort of like
Refine it.
like a Turing machine.
Right. So it seems that if we are capable of figuring it out to a certain depth, up to a certain depth, then we should be capable. Because, I mean, knowledge is about that. It's not only like I know this table because I can sense it, because I can sense it with my regular senses, and then also because I can put together those sensations into some sort of representation or image, and then manipulate the object with my imagination, etc. But to the extent that I am capable of taking it apart, putting it back together, and then like taking each of its elements, breaking them down, putting them back together, the more I'm capable to making the thing from scratch, then the more knowledge, the deeper the knowledge that I have about table making and about tables, right? So are we capable right now of creating life? Yes, we are, but we do it like through the typical, sexual reproduction way, right? But we are pretty close. We are already like, producing life not by the regular sexual. We can create in vitro.
But that's not like a new method of life. That's just sort of like removing the constraints.
Right.
And you're starting already from something that's alive. Like
Absolutely.
you're never breaking that link.
Yes.
Starting from something that's not alive, taking a lot of non-alive things
Absolutely.
and combining them and creating life. We cannot do
Which
that.
tells me that the complexity of life is such that we are still far from getting
That's why
to a place.
I use the term like machine, right? Or
Right.
device. Is that
Right.
like, take for example, like a thermometer. Like, common sense is like, oh, it's measuring how hot it is or how cold. What it's actually doing, right, is measuring the speed at which like protons or whatever are moving.
Right.
So it's like, well, how precise are our devices right now to like observe that happening?
Yeah, I don't think they are very precise. If we really want to go to the root of life, how life is emerging directly from lifeless elements, I don't think we are there. I think we have a vague notion of it, but I don't shy away from the notion of machine.
But even if we create, which I think that's gonna be easy, if we create artificial life, right? If we AI that's gonna mimic to the minute nuance of a human being, there's like the Turing thing still. Like, is there life inside that? I know this is not mathematical.
Yeah, no, I know, but this.
Can we get to calculus already?
So okay, I will move faster here. This is what how social structures form. Well, think of the simplest possible social interaction. So you have two individuals, right, operating on the world, like say operating on a particular object. They are cooperating, and by engaging in this sharing of the object, sharing of the world, right? Not only sharing the world, sharing that object, but also sharing the goal. They have to have the same intent. If they don't do that, it's like, think of it this way. This is one of my favorite examples in my classes. Like, think of it this way. Imagine that we have a very bulky object here in the middle of the room, and that I come and try to push it out of the way, and I can't because it's too heavy. And then each of you comes in turn and tries to push it out of the way. So the productivity is zero in terms of how many classrooms we have clear, right? No, none, right? Zero, because we cannot move the object. Now suppose that all of us coordinate. We say like, okay, we're gonna move that object. It's a piano or something like very heavy, no wheels. We're gonna put it in that corner, right? So we all move in unison, and then we lift it or we push it, and then then our productivity leap from 0 to 1, right? And so that is the result of what? That is the result of this thing, which is what we call cooperation. When you think about it, humans, we either help each other or we don't. You know, there are a lot of betweens, right? We can help, and we can help with half our hearts. We can do it with a lot of conviction. We can, all of that can happen, right? We can do it because we have to, like the way we cooperate with our parents or the way we cooperate with our bosses, right? Because they are dangling the carrot or they are, wielding the stick on our backs and the whip, right? So, but we cooperate, and then something happens as a result, right? That thing that happened is something that is not the individuals as scattered beings, right? It's the result, it's an emergent phenomenon, it's an emergent property of the individuals interacting, right? The individuals helping each other. And so we either help each other or we don't, and when we don't, we can do it also in degrees. Like we can just walk away, like, okay, I'm not buying. That's what we mean when, markets fail. So what is a market failure? It's like when people are like, I want to sell this, I want to sell a house. Who's buying? You don't find a buyer. It's like, okay, the market disappeared, right? So there's no market. So then, it's the collapse of or the failure of a social structure because you don't find any the other side of the market to cooperate with. Or we can engage into outright conflict, like war, right? Fights, etc., which is like the opposite of forming society. It's like we are basically unraveling our social connections. Okay, so trade is a form of cooperation. It's just a form of cooperation that has certain characteristics. One of the characteristics is that the object that now is like, I'm gonna hand you this object, and you're gonna hand me another object, right? But basically what we are exchanging is not so much the objects, right? But it's actually the ownership over the objects. Right? And what is the ownership? The ownership over the objects is a social structure. Right? Maybe I'm simplifying too much here in the doctrine of liberal doctrines of natural rights and all that. The argument that nature or God, divine right of ownership, that gods or nature endow people with rights. Natural rights or God-given rights. Well, how do you distinguish between a natural right and a natural might? Like, what does it mean to be endowed with a natural right? Like, I'm born here, like I'm just dropped into the world here. I'm naturally occupying space, so I'm establishing a claim over space, over land, over so I don't need to excuse myself. I'm just here. I exist, and I'm already establishing a claim over physical resources in this world, right? And so, what does it mean? Does it mean that I own this land? What does it mean that? Okay, who gave me that? Well, the power. Nature gave me the power, right? Because nature made me of this size, and then I'm here, right? And I cannot shrink. I cannot float. I'm here. I'm using the land here, right? And so, if you say that nature gives you a right, then nature should enforce that right, right? And if nature gives you the right to own that, right? I can claim the opposite and say that no, nature gave me the right to own that, not you, me. Nature favored me. My God gave me that right. Your God wasn't a correct God. Wasn't the right God. So your God could, I don't care what your God says, by the way. I care about what my God says, and my God says that I am entitled to that object there. And I'm going to just grab it if I can, right? Why? Because I can, because of my might. I'm stronger, I'm bigger, whatever, right? And so that is might. That is really not right. Right means something else, right? Right means this. Right means like, he is the rightful owner. Okay, and if I dare to try to grab that without his consent, without his permission, then not only him rightfully, but also the rest of society are gonna like put me in my place. It's like, no, you cannot do that. So it's definitely a social structure. It's a social structure, right? Maybe it's not a social agreement a la Voltaire, or who was the social contract, Rousseau. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of right? Just kind of also predicated on some sort of basis of might?
Yeah. Well, originally, yes.
Talking
Originally,
about country here.
Well, that's one of the titles, right? And might makes right.
right.
One of the soccer-
Right, like they say, possession is like what percentage of the law? Like if you are already like sitting in that house, or you are squatting in that house, and there is a legal dispute over who really owns that house, and there will, maybe you are gonna end up with a house, and then at a point you're gonna just like go to through the court system and get it normalized and get it legalized, right? If there are no other claimant that can prove to the satisfaction of the judge that, whatever.
Right now, are you implicitly sort of including together, or still separating like personal and private property?
Well, private property basically means that I am entitled to deciding on the object, right? And what to do with the object. And the object, what can we do with this object? Well, I can use it myself. I can consume it myself, right? If it is a consumable, then I can use it in my personal production of myself. If it is a machine, I cannot eat the machine. I cannot, wear the machine. I'm gonna have to I need to utilize it this way. Maybe I can rent it out to somebody, right? But basically means that I can exclude others, not because I'm powerful personally, but because society would be on my side, right? Because I have society already, we have entered into some sort of an agreement, an implicit contract is going on here, right? Where society validates that I am the rightful claimant, the rightful owner of this object. And by the way, my claim, by excluding your claims, right, means that my right is your obligation. The size of my right, the measure of my right, is immediately the measure of your obligation, right? Because you are now obligated to respect my claim over this object. I'm the one who decides what to do with it. Of course, I can give it away, but that's up to me, right? Within the confines of the law. But now notice that there are confines of the law, right? What are the limits? What are the constraints? Ownership exists, which, by the way, is a way to reinforce the notion that ownership is a social structure, okay? Well, number one, it's a material object. Because it's a material object, it's subject to the laws of physics, etc. I cannot use it as a means to transport myself to another planet. That wouldn't work because it doesn't have the physical, the mechanical characteristics that would permit me to do that, right? So I can only use it for the purposes that is physically fit to provide me with, so to speak. Okay, that's one thing. So I'm limited by the laws of nature. That's one thing. I'm also constrained if I live in a society with markets. I mean, as a society where private ownership is the rule, right? Because that's the premise of a society with markets. What is the premise? The fundamental premise of a society with markets is that people are the private owners of wealth, right? Basically, all of this and the land, natural resources, right? All of this belongs to somebody. And that somebody can be, at the end of the day, is going to be individuals. At the end of the day, it's going to be individuals. Right? There may be intermediate structures in between, but at the end of the day, the structures are going to be formed by individual humans. So the owners, at the end of the day, are going to be individuals. Okay? So I'm sorry you're taking so much time on this, but I thought that this was, I wanted to do this at the around the discussion of equilibrium or proportionality. I know it's a big detour from math. but I'm already here, so. So, okay, so I was saying that if I live in a society with markets, then I cannot sell this for $1 billion, except by a miracle, right? I would have to find a buyer who is a billionaire here, who's also stupid, right? Who would be willing to pay that much money for this. So I'm limited by economic laws, right? But not only that, right? I cannot use this as a weapon. That would be illegal. So I'm also constrained by the legal code, right? Just like if I own a car, I cannot park it anywhere I want, right? So parking laws apply to me. I have to move the car on Mondays because blah, 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 right? What else? I'm morally constrained also, right? Like, for example, like, if I have a motorcycle, can I, operate my motorcycle very noisy in the middle of the night in my neighborhood, and wake up all the babies and all that? Of course I can, right? Of course I can. Physically I can, legally I can, probably legally I can, but morally it wouldn't be nice, and my neighbors are gonna shun me, my neighbors are gonna shame me, they're gonna, behind my back, they're gonna say that I'm a nasty person, right? And so on and so forth. There are also aesthetic constraints. So I'm saying that there are social constraints and physical constraints on ownership. Ownership is physically and socially confined or circumscribed. That's what I'm saying, right? So, okay. So when ownership is private, then the only way in which ownership can be transferred from one person to another person is willfully or voluntarily. You cannot be coerced because that's illegal. You cannot be coerced. So the only way I would transfer this object to someone else is if I consent to do so. Right? So the way we usually operate with private ownership is that we consent when there is reciprocity. Right? I give you this, and you give me something in exchange. Right? So there is exchange there. So I cooperate with you. Yes, I cooperate with you, but then you have to cooperate with me.
Do you mean reciprocity the way like Polanyi means it, like where he's talking about like the reproduction of
right?
The
no. This would be precisely like the opposite of what Polanyi means when he gets so horrified by the dissolvent effects, the socially dissolvent effects of the market, right? So it's precisely like not reciprocity, like voluntary reciprocity, like helping you because I just want to help you, like out of the goodness of my heart, I'm helping you, or out of a sense of solidarity with the community. No. Now I'm looking after myself, and I'm giving you this, but only if you reciprocate by giving me something that I deem of similar value, right? And actually, like, at the very least, equal value, at the very least, because why would I give you something this valuable in exchange for something less valuable voluntarily? I would be shooting myself in the foot, right? So I would only consent if I view that the object I'm receiving has at least the same value as the object that I'm giving in exchange, right? So it would be something like that. But so now we are breaking this. So now we have all the products, not only the products, right? The elements of wealth, but also natural wealth, natural resources, right? They are going to have attached to them some sort of a bond, right? Or like you can think of it like a contract that stipulates the rights and obligations of ownership, because again, ownership means rights and it also means obligations, right? If you own a dog, right, and your dog bites a person on the street, you have liabilities, right? So you have obligations. Actually, it's very likely that in ancient Greece, when they codified private ownership, like Solon, one of the 7 sages of Athens, came up with the idea of the code of private ownership in ancient Athens. It was precisely because people were complaining, your goats are eating my grass or destroying my garden or whatever. Right? So it's like, okay, we need to delimit very carefully whose rights and whose obligations are this or that. Right? And so that's how the the full institution, the modern institution of private ownership, and of course the Romans took that to an even higher level. And then, in modern, more recently, from the 16th century on, all of that became much more sharpened and sophisticated. And those are the institutions of, the commercial code that we have now and all that. But, rights and obligations are always rights and obligations over actual physical resources. A right that entitles you to nothing physical is not a real right. What does it mean to have a right over something that is not physically existing? So that means that all rights and all obligations are ultimately bonds or rights and obligations over existing wealth. Right? Over existing wealth. It can only be over existing wealth. I know that some of these financial contracts or bonds are predicated on future wealth, but future wealth doesn't exist yet. So how can you claim it? You will have to wait. The only reason why those financial contracts have any value now is because they represent a claim over existing wealth, right? Over existing wealth. So of course, at a discount, because the future wealth on which they are premised doesn't exist yet, right? See what I mean? Like when you lend money to somebody, right? You have a right. You are entitled to receiving a certain amount of money 1 year from now with interest. Yeah, but that's 1 year from now, right? Right now, you don't have that money. The person that borrowed the money has the money and is spending it. So you will have to wait for that year for you to receive that inflow of cash. So, but right now, what can you do? Well, if there are markets, financial markets, you can turn around and sell your bond to somebody else, but at a discount. You will have to discount it. It wouldn't be at the face value that it has, right? The amount of money you will be receiving 1 year from now. Okay. Okay, actually, I blew my time on this, and can I close this chapter at this point now, and let me go back to the original plan that I had on equilibrium and the quadratic equation? Okay, because I don't feel fully well about using up all this time on this discussion. It's very interesting, but I think I should move on to the more technical mathematical aspects of it. Okay, the kind of an important point that we can make on the basis of this discussion here is that if you take any of these cylinders, any of these containers, or any of these boxes, right, for this system to flow, right, the ins in any of these boxes or in any of these cylinders have to be equal to the outs. Right? There has to be some proportion between the ins and the outs. Now, when you think that this is activity of a society, right, so that means that it's carried out, is performed by different individuals, there is absolutely no reason why, in principle, right, the ins and the outs must equalize. They have to equalize. If they don't equalize, you don't have a society. But the equalizing is going to be a complicated process. Right? The equalizing is going to be a complicated process. So you can take any of these objects in this diagram and look at the arrows pointing in, look at the arrows pointing out, and you can make say that if you want to model that mathematically, the inflows and the outflows have to match. If there is no match, then the system doesn't function. Right? So, using a simple illustration from microeconomics, the prototypical model of the economist is the very famous, the competitive market, right? A competitive market. So say that we have a competitive market. Here we are defining a competitive market in very simple abstract terms. What is a market under this general abstract definition? Well, basically a market is just a bunch of people, right, that you can divide into groups or categories. And actually the individuals don't have to be different. Like, it may be just their hats. They can switch their hats from buyers to sellers, like they do in financial markets. It's like, oh, I'm buying, oh, I'm selling, oh, I'm buying, I'm selling. So the same individual can be a buyer or seller. But just to make things simpler, let's pretend that you can actually separate them. And you have here the primary sellers, the original sellers, which would be the producers, the makers of the product, right? And here you would have the final consumers, right? At the very end of the line, downstream, you would have the final consumers. That would be the last buyers. So you have the primary sellers and the ultimate buyers and interacting. And so a competitive market would be a market with so many buyers and so many sellers that no individual buyer and no individual seller would have the ability to dictate the terms of the transaction, wouldn't have the ability to set the price. Has no monopoly, right? So because of that, the price is going to emerge, is going to form as a result of the interaction among all buyers and sellers through a competitive process. That's why we call it a competitive market. And so we would have a description of the behavior of the buyers. And that description of the behavior of the buyers is what we call the demand, right? Demand side. The demand side is about the behavior of the buyers, right? And the buyers are driven, to purchase more or less a larger or a smaller quantity of the particular good that is exchanged in this market by a bunch of factors, but top among those factors is, of course, the price. It's, of course, the price. So the equation that we typically use to describe demand is an equation that has the price there, and also the quantity demanded, and then all the other factors, typically we call that the economic environment of buyers. We put them all together into a single bucket, and in terms of the equation representing demand, we would have something like quantity equals an intercept, some number there, some constant number there. It's not constant. There is the other factors bunched together, right? Minus, typically minus some slope multiplied by the price, right? Or we may have it in the inverse form, like something like this, right? The price on the left-hand side, this is called the inverse demand form, the price on the left-hand side, and then we will have some sort of intercept, like for example, 130 minus 2Q, and then that would be descriptive of the behavior of the buyers given conditions in the economic environment. That means that they are not wealthier than before. They stay with the same level of wealth or income. Their preference for the particular good or alternative goods that are somehow connected to this good are not varying any either, etc. All other conditions are fixed. And so what we have here is just the connection between the price and the quantity that buyers desire to buy, which is called the quantity demanded. And so we can have also a description here of the supply side, also in the inverse form with the price on the left-hand side, and let's say that this is 10 plus Q. I hope that my numbers will be nice. Yes.
So you would set those equal to each other.
Exactly, right? So we can equalize the price, because the price has to be the same for buyers and sellers. The quantity exchange, the quantity that sellers sell, has to be equal to the quantity that buyers buy in equilibrium. Yes.
So to put it in a more mathematical accurate sense, you would have PD equal to PS, which represents the equilibrium price of the
Yes.
competitive market.
Indeed, right. We can do that. If we had it like reverse, if we had the quantity, that would be in the direct form, right? The quantity on the left-hand side, and then expressed as and this is a linear model, right? So I'm using the simplest setting possible. So if we had the quantity on the left-hand side and the price on the right-hand side, still the slope would be negative. It would be the reciprocal of 2, that would be 1/2, etc., right? But it would be now the job of equalizing the quantities, because the quantity purchased by the buyers must equal the quantity sold by the sellers. So here we're gonna equalize the prices, So we're gonna go through these mechanics very quickly because you guys have studied this before in your micro classes. So we have something like this, and then we can move this to Q to the side. And so we would have, and then we subtract 10 on both sides of the equation. So it cancels out, and we have 120 equals, what is that, 6Q. Then we divide across by 6. Right? Slow me down if something looks out of the ordinary. And then 120 divided by 6 looks like a 20. And so I have a solution here, partial solution, or half of the solution, says that the quantity traded, or the quantity exchange between buyers and sellers, equals 20 units of the good. It would be tons of corn or whatever. And once we have the quantity, we can plug it here, or we can plug it here, and we will determine then the price in equilibrium. So let's do it in both, right? Let's do it in both. And so the price in equilibrium is going to be equal to 130 minus, I'm going to do the multiplication here, twice 20 is 40. And how many units are this? 90, right? No units, I'm sorry, 90. Let's say that we use dollars per unit. So that is the price in equilibrium. And I'm going to double check it. Now let me use this equation here just for peace of mind. 10 plus 4 times 20 or 80. 80 plus 10, definitely 90. Double check, right? $90 per unit is the price in equilibrium. So that was quick, right? Okay, in the assignment, in the homework that I sent you in one of the quizzes, instead of giving you a linear supply, or is it the demand? No, it's this supply. I think I gave you a parabolic one, a quadratic one. So I want to help you with that a little bit by reminding you of something that you probably studied in middle school or high school, which is called the quadratic equation. It's one of those, the quadratic function, but on the right-hand side, you will have 0. So this is the quadratic equation. Well, the function is an equation, but it's an equation where you have 2 unknowns. Or one depends on the other. So an equation, in this case, we will have only one unknown. So we will have something like this: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That's the quadratic equation, the typical one. And the solution to this equation, sure you can Google YouTube, find a YouTube video that says this, but let me see if I remember quickly how to do this. I'm going to divide across by a. If I divide the right hand, a has to be different from 0, of course, right? Otherwise it's trivial. Because if a is equal to 0, then this becomes linear equation, right? So a has to be different from 0. And so if I divide across by a, then this becomes x squared plus b over a times x plus c, but I'm going to move c to the other side. So it's going to be minus c. Actually, c is divided by a, so it's going to be c divided by a. I'm moving it to the other side. I could move the c before and then divide across by a. Doesn't matter. Both of those things are equivalent. And now I have to complete the square. I have to complete the square here so that I get an expression like this: x plus something, something squared. Right. In order to get there, I need to find. Would be half of this the square, so it would be b over 2a, right? That would be, is that right? hold on, b over 2a, if I square it, this would be x squared plus bax plus b over 2a. And then if I add this here, hold on, this has to be square. This has to be square. Right, so let me do quickly the product here. This is x squared plus twice b squared b squared, hold on, 2a squared plus plus twice b 2a times x, and then this cancels out with this, and so I go back to that, so this is the element that I'm adding, right? Okay, let me go back over this.
And the second thing.
Okay, yeah, I figured out.
No, sorry, like after you divided everything by a, then like you squared both terms, it seems like there's something, I'm just sort of confused, like with the 2a and then the squared, but
Okay,
the third line I'm confused about, the second green line.
okay, let me, I have a little bit of time to complete this, to find the equation. Okay, so let me scratch this, because I figured it out in my head, but now I can explain it, so let me go back.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna use a different color. So look at this, I need to complete the square, so I need something like this, x plus something squared, right? And I'm gonna have to add something here to complete the square. And then if I add something here, I have to also add it on the right-hand side. Okay, I'm gonna have to add it also on the right-hand side. I'm gonna be adding something. And the question is, what is it that I am adding? And what I am adding is this. So this b over 2a, right? B over 2a. And so if I expand this product, I get the following. I get x squared. I'm just kind of reverse engineering it here, right? So it's that, and then the square of this, that's b squared over the square of 2 is 4, the square of a is a squared, or I can put 2a and then parentheses a square. It's up to me, right? And then, but then I have to add twice the product of this times this, right? It's just the formula. This formula, a plus b squared equals a squared plus b squared plus twice a and b. Okay, that's what I'm doing. That's all I'm doing. So I need twice b over 2a times x, right? Twice times this times that. And then this 2 can disappear. And then, yes?
So you would add b squared over 4 squared on the other side.
Yes, then necessarily I have to do that, right? Because this is just x and b over a times x multiplying x, b over a multiplying x. So I need to add this. So if I add that here, I'm fine. But then I have to do it also on here. Okay, so now I can erase this because this was really the way of helping my mind to figure out how much I needed to add in order to complete this square. Right? This equality holds, and you can expand this equality, and you will go back to this. You will go back to this. Yes.
But you don't need that plus b squared over 4ac on the left side, because the equation in the parentheses already gives that.
Oh, I need to subtract it. I'm sorry. Right? Because
Yeah.
I haven't added, I have to subtract it, but if I subtract it here, I have to subtract it here as well. Right? Oh, subtract. Okay. And so, okay, now let me, Okay, so now let me. No. When I do this, I subtract it, right? Then the equality stays, right? Because here I am adding it, and here I'm subtracting it. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm gonna move that to the other side, and it's gonna move adding. So it's gonna be minus c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. And then on the left-hand side, I'm gonna end up with x plus b over 2a squared. Got it. And now I'm going to take the square root here, and I take the square root here. If I take the square root here, then this goes, and I get x plus b over 2a, and that will be equal to plus minus, because the square roots always come in a dual form, right? Plus and minus, and then this is minus. Okay, here I can take the common denominator here, right? So let me do that here. So it's going to be 4a squared. And then let me put this first because it's adding. So I prefer to put that first. And then this, I will have to multiply by 4a, right? By 4a, so that when I multiply this by 4a, it becomes 4a squared, right? So you multiply this by 4a and this by 4a, this becomes 4a squared, and now it's common denominator, okay? So this is going to be 4ac, and now I'm kind of remembering the formula. I'm remembering the formula now. Probably you memorize it. I have a hard time memorizing formulas. And so, okay, this actually can be like this, right? I can, because it's a fraction, I can take the square root of here, and then I can take the square root here, and the square root of this is 2a. This is just 2a. Okay? And that actually comes in handy because when I move this to the left, it's going to be negative. And so I'm going to get x minus b equals minus b divided by 2a plus minus b squared minus 4ac, the square root of that, divided by 2a. Because they have the same denominator, I have the down formula. So the formula is that x equals minus b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Had to sweat to figure it out when Google gives it to you like this. Okay, so if instead of having a supply equation that is linear like this one, you have a quadratic one, right? Then you will have to equalize the price and the price nonetheless, right? Except that now the result of that equalization is going to give you a quadratic equation. And so you don't have to do all that, you just use the formula, right? And then you will, and of course, you're going to have two solutions. You have two prices, but you can rule one of them out because it's going to be negative and cannot be, right? Cannot be negative. Questions? Yes.
Very quickly, you mean either the demand or the supply will be expressed as the quadratic equation right there, and then you don't need to identify what is A, what is B, what is C?
Oh, no. You're gonna have to, like what I'm saying is that if, for example, if you have something like this, right? So let me see. Suppose that you have something like this. Yes,
So this formula is very useful to use when you're trying to find an equilibrium when it's equal to zero for a quadratic function.
yes.
Because sometimes it is necessary to look for a value that equals zero.
Yeah, but in this case, it's gonna come up when you equalize these two. Let's do this. Let's suppose that this is my equation, okay? So I'm kind of giving it away a little. I'm giving it away.
It's 32 minus 0.5.
30 minus 2q equals 10 plus 4q squared.
So
Yes.
just so you would minus 130 plus 2q and make it z equal to 0. Okay.
So you bring everything to the left-hand side,
Mm.
then when the right-hand side is going to be 0. And now you don't have price anymore because you equalize the prices, you have only quantity. And so you solve for q. Once you have q, you plug it here or here, you have a solution. Okay? Everybody is okay with that? I don't need to go into further detail. And I still want to cover a little bit about capitalist reproduction if you give me the chance in the next class, okay? Because that may be the only chance that I have to present to you the Marxian or the Marxist schemes of reproduction in a mathematical form. And I don't think there is any other course where you would be learning those kind of things for whatever they are worth, right? It's actually pretty basic. It's pretty basic, but I found it illuminating when I first learned it. I felt like an economist, like, oh, I understand political economy now. When I went through the volume 2 of Capital and I learned. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Let me, I wonder if this worked. I'm gonna edit it so that I'm ass and all that is removed.
on YouTube?
Well, because Santiago couldn't make it because he had some sort of family problem, and I thought I have the YouTube here, so I don't know if I can do this each
You should.
because, and I don't want to give you I think you gain something by being here.
No.
But we can also.
No?
And then we